Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz trumpeter and flautist Aaron Shragge. He was born and raised in Montreal and has played with many cats like Daniel Carter, Ben Monder, Dave Douglas, and Medeski, Martin and Woods, Billy Martin, and at places like the Kennedy Center and the Blue Note. He is well-versed in the Tom Waits arts as well. His quintet plays the music of Tom, and he just released 2017's Dirt in the Ground and has many tales to tell. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for adding your voice to Neon Jazz and taking a minute out for me. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no problem. My pleasure.
So let's go ahead and start off here. Dirt in the Ground is the latest album. Give me an idea of what's going on with you lately with promotion and kind of activity surrounding this album.
Well, in terms of promotion, we're using Orange Grove publicity, as you know. We, in terms of getting the word out, we organized this tour that's, the last date is actually today. It's not the same band the whole way through, which, is sort of the reality in terms of budget and availability, but we went through Germany, we had dates Berlin, Duisburg, Dortmund, we were in France, in Beaune, and Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. I mean, you probably have the list of the full dates.
Talk to me about the album. How do you feel about the album now that it's completed and you're performing it live? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I feel like it came out really well. I mean, it's hard to be satisfied with anything that you do as an artist, but I feel like in particular this one, we explored more sort of different territory than the first album. Definitely went into sort of more of Tom Waits' sort of grungier, more rock side, as well as some of the more sort of avant-garde stuff, like the title track, Bone Machine, the track that the album that Dirt in the Ground is on, won a Grammy, I think it's in 1990 for Best Alternative Album. So it's a really sort of, important track from his repertoire. And so just that arrangement came from, was sort of, we played it over quite a long period of time, and, we hadn't recorded a lot of these newer songs that we'd been playing for a while, and so they'd be really sort of maturing and developing over time, and so, it was a really good opportunity to be able to record them and get them out there in recorded form.
So you had mentioned on your tour that you had gone through Montreal, and that's where you're from. Talk to me about growing up there and how you got into jazz specifically. Living
in New York for about, I think it's 14 years. I'm always really grateful to have grown up in Montreal. It's a smaller scene relative to bigger cities, but there's a lot there. I was able to play in these sort of student youth big bands like the CJAD big band, where I was able to work with Denny Christensen, who's been on staff at Humber College in Toronto for quite a while now. But, he had this really vast knowledge of actually being, a session musician in LA, and so I really got this exposure to high-level professionals. Jocelyn Couture was a really important teacher for me. Bill Mahar, these are all trumpet players. So, there's a really, really vibrant scene, and I also got exposed to a lot of different kind of music. I was in one youth student big band at a junior college. It's, we have CEGEP in Canada or in Quebec, which is sort of in between high school and college, and we did a lot of really interesting repertoire. We did like Don Ellis. We did a lot of Mingus. We did Bob Redinger, like a lot of this sort of really lesser known big band repertoire that's really interesting, really beautiful stuff. And then, I got to improvise, I was exposed to free improvisation even at that young age in Montreal, and so I had a lot of interest and exposure to different things. So it's a pretty vibrant scene, and it gave me, I think the other thing that I value specifically about Montreal is that there's sort of an openness to choose from a lot of those things. I think in the States, when I came to New School, it seems like, I noticed people had a lot stronger of a background in jazz, but maybe less exposure to different things and more sort of a straight and narrow idea about music sometimes as a result of this really sort of like the music programs in the States, I think, are really strong, but they kind of do one thing really well,
Absolutely. Well, let me get down to kind of some brass tacks about growing up. What jazz album specifically moved you?
Well, I mean, it's not going to be a very exciting answer initially, but I mean, I would say, I mean, you know, listening to Miles Davis was definitely a huge influence on me, like at a very young age. I mean, some of those live records, like live recordings of So What, or you know, but definitely kind of Blue was definitely on there. You know, a record that really had an influence on me in terms of giving me a different sort of different exposure was listening to John Hassel. I remember finding his first record just really randomly. I was in they still had these setups in stores at a CD store in LA where you could just listen to different types of music. But there's a recording that he does, John Hassel, of Nature Boy, which is with Bon Surrey flute, and it's just an incredible. Through my growing up, I mean, listening to Tom Waits was definitely always there for me. You know, it was always a big part of my musical diet.
You know, we're a big fan of Tom Waits at the show. He's always been one of my favorites even before getting into the jazz radio scene. And what I want to know from you is it's kind of like that Hunter S. Thompson kind of thing. You know, I always hear that from the actors, Bill Murray specifically and Johnny Depp, when they played him, they could never get him out of their blood. And it almost seems like that's the way Tom Waits is. When you really like him, he gets kind of stuck into your bloodstream, so to speak. So what is it that's so profound about Tom and what he does musically that's influenced you, which is just a big influence?
Well, yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. I like that because Tom Waits' music was kind of around. My father had some mixtapes, and my brother started listening to it, and I was sharing a room with my brother, so I kind of had, it was just there, and then it sort of just became part of me. I think what really started to build that connection was just, there's a physical quality in his voice that's, I think, very connected thematically. It's almost like the manifestation of his thematic and lyrical contact. His voice embodies that so well. And so I, really growing up, really identified with that content, that sort of way of examining, being heartbroken or, feeling like, you just can't figure things out or things aren't going well. I mean, these are really common themes in music, but there's a very particular way that Tom Waits does it by, singing from a character. And then, there's a musical aesthetic, that you can hear in all these diverse styles that Tom Waits moved through. And there's very much always sort of like this Waits kind of sound. And sometimes that's present only through his voice, like in the earlier stuff, or when he was doing these string arrangements, like Somewhere, where, he's probably not involved in like really arranging this entire string section, but because his voice is there, it gives it the music that quality right away. But then later on, when he's, really sort of more in direction of the music, like in Rain Dogs and Swordfish Trombone and later Bone Machine, you really get, it's as though his voice, those qualities in his voice are really in the music in terms of like, these arrangements that feel like completely chaotic, but then somehow controlled. And I think there's also what appealed to me was the looseness, but not quite train wreck quality of some of his music, which I found really appealing, that you could have this thing that, where it seems like there's all these different elements going on. It feels sort of chaotic, but it's really held together somehow, and there's really a consensus between the musicians. And I found that. And then especially in the context of music that's not necessarily totally avant-garde or really out there harmonically. So, I think that's one of the aspects that I really draw on, is that you can have music that's, challenging, but that's still sort of within the song form medium,
Absolutely. Have you seen Tom live?
I have not. I wish I had. I need to get on that sooner than later, but yeah, I've heard it's a difficult process. Some friends of mine saw him recently, and they just, as soon as the tickets were announced, they just stayed on the phone, and they just chose to film it in whatever city they could get tickets for.
Wow. Yeah, he's getting to that point. And I guess that feeds into my question as far as being a lover of jazz. If you could get into a time machine and see anybody, would it be him, or who would you want to see live?
Yeah, I guess definitely Tom Waits. during a certain period, like just that would be incredible. I don't know. I mean, there's so many. I mean, definitely. I got to see Kenny Wheeler perform live several times, but I would like to see him probably when he was, younger, just right at his peak would have been amazing. I did get to see Leonard Cohen live. That was an incredible experience.
Let me ask you generically, why do you love jazz?
Because, improvisation drove me into jazz. That's sort of like really where I began to really connect with music. I think jazz, it's a reflection of American culture in the sense that it's, it's bringing a bunch of different elements together and trying to work them out in the moment. And I think that's sort of the beauty of it. I mean, I think that's where it gets me, and that it can evolve, and there's so many forms, and that even in this relatively short history to other musical cultures, there's been so many changes and movements and shifts, and and people who are still only playing music like it was in the 1950s, which is fine. And I think there's a lot of diversity, and I think the best is yet to come in terms of what can happen.
Absolutely. So, what do you see your future as? You've just released a new album. You're obviously a very busy person. You got a lot going on, and where do you see yourself in, say, 10 to 20 years from now? Where do you want to see your career and your professional growth?
I'd say, more of the same. I mean, I think I always want to be playing more. I could see this project still going. I feel like, Tom Waits' music, there's so much, like even talking to people on this tour in the audience who know his music well, and they've been like, oh, there's that song, from Heart of the Saturday, like Grapefruit Moon, or there's a lot of songs I don't want to do. So definitely just touring and playing and, having a family and, just lots of music. I don't know.
Right on. No, that's good, man. So everyone has a version of you, your family, your friends, those that buy your music and you play live for. But when you wake up and you go out into the world, who do you think you are?
I'd say, I don't know. I mean, I hold the identity of being a musician, but, I think ideally I'm whatever, my life is asking of me. That's really who I should be, in the moment.
I like that. It's a great way to wrap everything up. Aaron, thank you for the music. Thank you for taking some time out and being a part of Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, you're very welcome.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, Montreal, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Aaron for his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazzyoutube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.